Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Joon Ha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now Thursday, November 27th. It's a little bit around 4:30 p.m., and we had huge breaking news at around 1 in the morning today because of this Nuri rocket launch.
Right, so South Korea successfully carried out the fourth launch of its domestically developed Nuri rocket early Thursday, so marking another milestone in the country's push to advance its own independent space launch capabilities. So the Korea Aerospace Administration, KASA, and also the Korea Aerospace Research Institute, KARI, said the launch took place at 1:13 a.m., as you just mentioned, and also proceeded normally through all stages of flight. Initial analysis of telemetry data also showed the rocket placed its payloads, the next generation medium-sized satellite number 3, and 12 cube satellites, totaling to 13, into their target 600-kilometer orbit.
Now, when I was watching this broadcast live at around 1 in the morning, the talk amongst the news anchors, whether we talk about KBS or NBC or SBS, the rhetoric was extremely uber patriotic. Isn't it beautiful the way the rocket glares in the night sky, etc., etc. But moving away from that patriotic rhetoric, what exactly are the implications of the successful launch?
Right. So there is sort of agenda here from the government about this sort of public-private partnership that came behind the launch. So the agency was noting the significance, saying that Hanwha Aerospace, the system integration contractor, oversaw production and assembly of the rocket and participated in launch operations led by KARI, which is a format of the government. So they were saying that the government plans to launch 2 more Nuris by 2027, and also will continue development of a next-generation rocket with a much greater performance, they were saying.
So if we just strip it all down, what that really comes down to is that this is a Korean-made rocket by Korean engineers, launched from a Korean platform. This is a Korean rocket. And so all of this messaging, sure, it has that whole, aren't you feeling patriotic with the message to it? But at the end of the day, it also comes down to exports, right? Countries around the world are trying to put up their own satellites into orbit.
Sure.
They're trying to rely less on the United States because of how expensive rocket launches are. But that being said, one thing that I did not hear from any of the Korean government officials or even from the Korean media is the competition that we're entering.
Yeah.
And that's because right now, sure, Korea is the new kid on the block when it comes to rocket technology.
But it is still very much behind in the East Asian hemisphere regarding...
Specifically Japan.
And also China, which is miles away from what South Korea is currently beginning its beginner phase into.
Right. The Chinese completely dominate the rocket market when it comes to East Asia. And so trying to catch up with China is already going to require a giant leap. But beyond China, we also have to worry about our near competitor, which is Japan. Japan's flagship rocket is the H3.
Yeah.
Now, they did fail in the 2023 rocket launch, but since then, they've had multiple successes. I believe their most recent one was in February this year.
That's correct.
And when it comes to the H3, they have a lot more range, and by range I'm talking about payloads. They can have massive payloads by several tons. They can also have smaller payloads. South Korea yet does not have that capability.
Right. I mean, South Korea does have quite a lot of catching up to do. The success that it had, which was quite grandly stated by KASA and KARI just yesterday or today even. That's still going on, but as we've said and as we've mentioned before, playing catch up to the H3 is something that will take decades.
And so we do need to always consider what the rhetoric is coming from the South Korean government, or what the messaging is for whom exactly. Is it for domestic audiences? Is it for international audiences? What's being said? What's not being said? So again, because this is going to have industrial and business repercussions, we just cannot take the Korean government's word at its face value.
Absolutely not. I mean, any space program in any country will be uber patriotic. This is an achievement, and all credit to the scientists who work day and night on this program. But of course, as you mentioned, in terms of industrial and business partnership sense, and also South Korea is lagging behind in the space market with its competitors and its most recent neighbor, that's something that South Korea has quite a lot of homework to do on. Speaking of exports, so South Korea's presidential office, it said just today that it respects Poland's decision to select Sweden's Saab over the Korean bidder Hanwha Ocean for its new submarine acquisition program, also known as the Orka submarine program.
I think just 2 days ago, I saw this news article on Yonhap saying that the South Korean government was going to hand over the Changbogo class submarine
the retired one.
that it just retired to Poland. Now, I'm sure that the move was trying to get Poland to say, here's a free submarine that you can use as a training platform. But that doesn't seem to have done a whole lot of good.
Right. So, Hanwha Ocean has very much set its eyes on expanding its sort of ocean market or ocean weaponry market into sort of more further west. But of course, with its exit from the Orca program, it does lag quite a bit.
Okay, so as we've discussed about this Orca program in past podcast episodes, sure, South Korea's been sending a lot of tanks and howitzers, but naval units is something that South Korea has faced significant competition from European countries, right? And so, and also because weapon sales are geopolitical in nature, Poland doesn't want to burn bridges with its NATO partners, of course, and so this was always going to be a long shot. But regarding the Changbogo class submarine that South Korea said was going to donate to Poland, now this was a significant gamble, and there was an opportunity cost involved, because we have to keep in mind that South Korea is not only trying to export submarines to Poland. You've also written analyses about South Korea's ambition to export submarines to Canada. But beyond the two Western countries, another country that South Korea should be looking at is the Philippines.
Yep.
South Korea signed a maritime agreement with the Philippines, and the Philippines is really desperately trying to upgrade its navy because of their frequent clashes with the Chinese Coast Guard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if we had, if South Korea had donated this retired submarine platform to the Philippines to use as a training platform, that would have brought so much goodwill with this important Southeast Asian country.
Right, and I think the focus was definitely on Poland, since Poland has been our top defense exporter in Europe for the past 3 years. But of course, I think that their eyes were set on, as I said, just focusing on Europe instead of their partners in Southeast Asia. And I think that really does hit home the importance of having a presidential control tower instead of having a presidential chief of staff going to the UAE, to Poland, all of these different countries to sell these Korean weaponry products.
And speaking of which, President Lee Jae-myung was also in Turkey most recently, right after the G20 summit in South Africa. He met with President Erdogan in Ankara. And there were a spate of agreements, several MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding, where they talked about defense cooperation, AI cooperation. What other kinds of cooperation did they talk about?
So nuclear energy, infrastructure, and advanced technologies. So they were saying that, just to go over defense first, so they agreed to expand defense ties, including co-production technology cooperation and training exchanges. So Lee was citing the Altai tank program, so Turkey's domestically produced variant based on South Korea's K2 Black Panther by Hyundai Rotem as a model for future cooperation. In nuclear energy, the two sides were signing an MOU between the Korea Electric Power Corporation and the Turkish Atomic Energy Authority. So they were laying that sort of groundwork for South Korea's participation in the sign-up Phase 2 nuclear power project on the Black Sea coast.
Now, Turkey is a very important country, of course, for historical reasons. Turkey was one of the first countries that sent troops to South Korea during the Korean War, which is why even now South Korea and Turkey still call each other brother countries, right?
Yeah, blood brothers, yeah.
But that being said, despite that rhetoric of closeness, South Korea-Turkey relations have really not developed all that much over the past many decades, really. Yeah. And so this move by President Lee going to Turkey and trying to expand all of this cooperation, that's really positive, a step in the right direction. And Turkey is just right in that area of the world that serves as a bridge between the Middle East and Europe.
Yeah.
And of course, Turkey has its own ambitions where they want to expand into the Caucasus. But the whole thing about defense cooperation with Turkey that we have to talk about is that Russia. Right now, South Korea still refuses to sell or even donate weapons to Ukraine because of the war in Russia. But that war that we've been seeing for the past few years now, it's not stopping, and we really don't know how regional conflicts in that part of the world could escalate. Because, as we just mentioned, how Turkey has ambitions of expanding its influence in the Caucasus, that's really within the Russian sphere of influence, and that could cause tensions between Moscow and Ankara. So if we are expanding defense cooperation with Turkey, because of course that would mean billions more dollars for South Korean defense contractors, what kind of long-term challenges is South Korea not really considering right now?
Well, South Korea, as you mentioned, its sort of political alignment with Europe on the whole concerning Ukraine has very much faltered since, I think it was February 2022 when the war started with Russia's invasion, but they haven't really anteed up ever since October 2024 either. October 2024, we saw President Yoon, or former President Yoon, receive reportedly a wish list from the Ukrainian defense minister, which did not actually come into fruition. The current South Korean administration have distanced themselves from Ukraine, not really participating in something even as simple as,
Not even a meet and greet.
Not even a meet and greet. There was one shake of the hand with Zelensky and Lee during their first sort of meeting at the G7, I think, and the expanded G7 and Lee's first of overseas multilateral summit.
Just days after they became president.
Exactly. So, and that's not really going forward. And when we talk about Western Europe and also Eastern Europe, the big thing on their mind, as you mentioned, will be Russia and Russia's role after the war in Ukraine and how post-war Europe goes forward. But South Korea's current role in that is very low. There's nothing really that they have to offer except for reconstruction. There's nothing that they're trying to do. So I think that this defense cooperation with Turkey has a lot of bandwidth to improve in terms of South Korea's diplomacy with Europe, but that's still something we have to wait and see.
And I think this was back in August. You wrote about how South Korea was trying to sell submarines to Greece. And we've also covered in that analysis about how South Korea's attempt to sell submarines to Greece would also rub Turkey the wrong way.
Right. So, Turkey and Greece have historically not really had good relations, especially regarding security reasons. But I think South Korea, they're still trying to narrow the gap between their political alignment and also their economic ambitions. But I think that's not really succeeding, especially in terms of the goals that we're trying to see in Greece and Turkey and other states in Eastern Europe, including the Polish deal. And moving on, South Korea's central bank, it raised its growth outlook for the next year. They were citing stronger global semiconductor demand and easing uncertainty in the trade environment following the US-China tariff reduction deal. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Okay, so the BOK announced today that it was going to maintain interest rates at 2.5%. This is the fourth consecutive hold that we've seen. And now you've mentioned that economic growth numbers. That economic growth number is a solid 0.1% difference. It was 0.9% for 2025. The BOK improved that to 1%, but it's also saying that economic growth in 2026 will go to 1.8%. So still within the low digits, but it's better than less than 1% growth. But a lot of that projection had to do with assuming that global semiconductor markets demand is going to remain constant or will remain elevated. Now, we're not quite sure if that's actually going to remain the case because, as we've discussed in the past, this global AI chip market, this is taking on and resembling more and more a bubble market. And especially with how high-priced AI chips are, with the kinds of ceilings that these hyperscalers are facing, we don't know if demand is going to continue. Now, analysts expect that AI chip demand will remain robust until 2026. So perhaps the 1.8% number is not completely off the mark, but it's not taking a really long-term view. But the fact that we have to return to is that the 2.5% interest rate has remained in place. The South Korean government is running out of options. The BOK is running out of options. And right now, it cannot raise rates, it cannot lower rates, and it cannot really maintain rates either. Now, if it raises rates, it will depreciate the won even further. Now, for those of us who've been paying attention to how much the won is valued, today is at 14.66 to the dollar, but at its height, it went all the way up to 14.80. Now, 1,400 was supposed to be the psychological breaking point, but we are now reaching numbers that are close to 1,500. If we see further depreciation of the won, it's going to exacerbate inflation,
Right.
especially because of energy imports. So it cannot really raise interest rates. Now, it cannot lower interest rates either, because if it does, we have to consider the housing market. It's heavily leveraged right now, and it's going to cause pain for a lot of people. Now, if it tries to maintain interest rates, sure, there will be some short-term stability, but we also have to consider that right now the won is depreciating not only because of what's been going on with the South Korean won just in general, but the South Korean won is also moving in tandem with the Japanese yen. The Japanese yen significantly depreciated by several decades worth of depreciation just recently, and the Korean won is being treated almost like a proxy meter.
Right.
And because the South Korean won is also depreciating because of the Japanese yen, is again raising a lot of problems for the South Korean market. And another thing that we have to consider is that one of the reasons why the South Korean won has been depreciating so much is because of just how much capital outflow there has been. Sure, the Federal Reserve still has a higher interest rate. Now that has a yield disparity between between the BOK and the Federal Reserve. So that's also been leading to a lot of capital outflows. But beyond that, it's also because of individual Korean investors. Individual Korean investors today are not like what they were even 10 years ago.
No.
Korean investors are now quite savvy. They know that if they invest in, Korean companies like Samsung or Hyundai or what have you, they're not going to get as much dividends as they would if they invest in Google or Meta or Apple. And so they're investing in overseas. And beyond that, it's also got to do with the $350 billion investment package that South Korea signed with the U.S.
Yes.
So a lot of money is being transferred overseas. And because of all this Korean won no longer being in demand and people are demanding US dollars, the Korean won is continuing to weaken. Now, so the finance ministry said that they're going to have a 4-way intra-governmental panel to try to manage the currency outflows. They involve the Bank of Korea, the finance ministry, is also going to involve the health ministry, and I forget what the fourth one is as of right now. But because of this entire intra-governmental panel that they're actually looking at, they're going to the fourth one is the National Pension Service. And so they're trying to mitigate as much of the currency outflows as possible, but they're all caught between a rock and a hard place. Now, let's take the NPS, for example. The NPS is one of the largest pension funds in the world.
Which also has its own problems.
But beyond all of those problems, the NPS foreign holdings is like almost $900 billion. A significant change. And so what the South Korean government can say to public agencies like the NPS is, hey, repatriate your assets into Korean stocks, into Korean bonds and Korean equities. But that's going to have a cost-benefit scenario. Because sure, it might stabilize the Korean won, but if you were a foreign investor and you're thinking, oh, the NPS is not really all that independent, they are taking orders from the Blue House or the presidential office, then they're going to say, okay, in that case, let's not invest in Korean stocks and Korean public agencies, because really, we don't really know what the Seoul government is going to say one day. And so really, the South Korean BOK is at a loss of options.
Right. So then what is another pessimistic scenario that we could be facing in the second half of next year?
Well, the pessimistic scenario is that, as I mentioned, that bubble economy, that global AI chip demand just craters. Now, maybe not craters, but even slows down. Now, if that happens, South Korea's economy is going to take a huge hit. Because if we look at how the exports are going right now, if you're talking about manufacturing like EVs or batteries, those are being eroded by Chinese expansions into those markets. The one sector that's really keeping the economy afloat is semiconductors. And if we look at South Korea's domestic economy, we specifically have to look at jobs. The aggregate employment numbers are up. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the job quality is deteriorating. Because if we look at the job numbers, a lot of these job numbers are going into service sectors, into government, public sector jobs, and so that means that people are not having as much spending money as they would if manufacturing or construction is high. So if we look at all of that in domestic weakness and then combine that with potential reductions in semiconductor exports, that would mean that the IMF and the BOK saying that we're looking at a 1.8% growth rate for 2026 is going to be overly optimistic.
So what's that impact on inflation then?
Well, inflation is going to be a slightly different beast. And that's because the inflation is also impacted by the currency's depreciation. If that continues, inflation will continue to go up. Now, core inflation, I'm not so sure. But if we include energy and food costs, which is also heavily dependent on fuel prices, that would mean that inflation will creep back up. Inflation had been caught for the time being. But if we continue to look at depreciation of the won, that inflation numbers will go up as well. So we're looking at several different factors that are going to be interplaying at the same time. Depreciating won, increasing prices, decreasing semiconductor exports. It's going to be, well, let me put it this way, not a very good time.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see.
Looking to stay informed about South Korea's fast evolving political, business and cultural landscape? Join us on Korea Pro, the go-to resource for in-depth analysis expertly curated by top-tier professionals. And now you can pick the membership level that best suits your needs, thanks to our new subscription packages. Starting at just $199 annually, you can access daily analysis and our weekly podcast. Or try our premium membership package, which offers additional perks such as executive briefings, monthly reports and forecasts, networking receptions and event opportunities, as well as much, much more. To find the best fit for you, just head to signup.koreapro.org and become a member today.
Week ahead. So next week will mark 1 year since last year's failed martial law attempt by former President Yoon Suk-yeol. So Korea Pro, especially Lena Park and me, Joon Ha Park, will be heading to the 1 year commemoration demonstration in front of the National Assembly next Wednesday.
Which I'm sure will be very calm and rational discussions by everyone involved.
Well, yeah, that and light sticks. And all of this information will be sent to your week ahead newsletters, which will be sent by Monday 2 p.m. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe.
Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Joon Ha Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.